Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. So this is the very last theoretical lecture before we can start getting our hands dirty in the AWS console. So this lecture is on Identity Access Management. It's often referred to as IAM. You might be wondering what those 101s mean. Basically, in Australian universities, as well as some British and American institutions, when you're learning a new topic, it's, accounting 101 or engineering 101. So Identity Access Management 101 means that this is an introductory topic to Identity Access Management. So what is IAM? Well, basically, IAM allows you to manage users and their level of access to the AWS console. And it's really important to understand IAM and how it works, both for the exam and for administrating a company's AWS account in real life. Basically, if you're going to use AWS, you need to understand IAM, because IAM allows you to set up users, groups, permissions, and roles, and basically allows you to grant access to different parts of the AWS platform. So Identity Access Management offers the following features. It gives you centralized control of your AWS account. It gives you shared access to your AWS account. It gives you granular permissions, so you can say, okay, I want people to be able to access this service, but I don't want people to be able to access that service. It gives you identity federation. What do we mean by that? Well, it just means that you can use Active Directory or Facebook or LinkedIn with Identity Access Management. So potentially your users could log into the AWS console using the same username and password that they use to log into their Windows PCs. So that's just using Active Directory. Or it could mean that your end users, let's say you have developed a mobile game or something and it's storing information on AWS, they can do that using their Facebook credentials or their LinkedIn credentials, etc. IAM also gives you multi-factor authentication. This means that when you're logging in to the AWS Management Console, you need a username, a password, and then a special code in order to log in. And then it also provides temporary access for users or devices and services where necessary. And a good example of that, again, is if someone's using a mobile phone app and they're storing data in your AWS account, you only want them to be able to do that when they're using the app itself. So it's temporary access. It also allows you to set up your own password rotation policy. So you may want your users to rotate their passwords every 3 months or every 3 weeks, entirely up to you. And it integrates with many different AWS services, and it supports PCI DSS compliance. So PCI DSS compliance just is basically a compliant framework that if you're taking credit card details, you need to be compliant with the framework. So IAM supports PCI DSS. So we're going to learn some key terminology for IAMs, really 4 key terms that we need to learn. So one is users, and this is just simply end users such as people, employees of an organization, etc. We then have groups. So this is a collection of users. So each user in the group will inherit the permissions of the group. So you might have a group that is able to access S3, and you might have another group that's able to access EC2. So long as that user is in that group, that user will inherit the permissions of the group. We then have policies. Policies are made up of these things called documents, policy documents, and these documents are formatted in JSON, so JavaScript Object Notation Language, and I'll show you what that looks like later on. And it basically gives you permissions as to what a user, group, or role is able to do. So policies are your permissions. And then roles are basically you create a role and you assign them to a AWS resource. A role is a way of allowing one part of AWS to do something with another part. So you might give a virtual machine inside AWS the ability to write files to S3, which is a type of storage within AWS. We're going to have a look at that in the EC2 section of the course, so that is coming up. So what is the best way to learn IAM? Well, like anything with AWS, the best way to learn is by getting your hands dirty. So that's the end of this lecture. If you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture where we're going to log into the AWS console. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. So it's our very first lab. We're finally going to start getting our hands dirty with AWS. And in this lecture, we're going to learn all about identity access management. As mentioned in the last lecture, this is one of the most important AWS services because this service gives you access to control permissions to all the other services and to also create users, groups, and roles. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console. And if you look up here, you'll be able to see your regions. I know I did cover this off in the last section of the course. I would always suggest using US East as your main region, Northern Virginia. Like I said before, the reason for that is this is where all the new products and services are launched first. So this is always the most up-to-date region. This is also the region that goes down the most. So if we want to find identity access management, just click up on services. This will open up all the different services that are available for Amazon Web Services. I know it can be a bit overwhelming. Like I said, in the section 2, don't panic. No one person knows all of these services inside out, and only a small fraction of these services make up the Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam. Now, we're looking for security. You can see it here. It's got the little shield, so security, identity, and compliance. And what we're going to go ahead and do is click on Identity Access Management, and that will take us to this splash screen. And you'll be able to see in here that this is the landing page. Now, you've got a sign-in link. This is the link that you can send to your users. It's simply your account number, then .signin.aws.amazon.com/console. You can actually go in here and customize it. So you could do an account alias of a Cloud Guru. If someone has already taken it, however, you're going to, it's a universal namespace, so you won't be able to take it. So I'm going to say a Cloud Guru 2019. God knows if this will actually be available. No, someone has stolen it from me. Maybe I'll take 2020. So 2020, hit create. Oh my God. All right, I'm going to do 2020 Ryan, something like that. No one would have taken that. So there we go. So this is now changed that URL, and this is actually a DNS change. So this is a publicly accessible URL that people can go into to sign into this account. Now, the very first thing we're going to do is activate multi-factor authentication, or MFA, on our root account. And you might be thinking, what is a root account? Well, a root account is just the username, is the email address that you first signed up with AWS with. And when you log in using the root account, you have what I would call God mode. You're able to do anything inside of AWS. Now, for that reason, you pretty much don't want anyone to log in using the root account. You want to create, a whole bunch of users and a whole bunch of different groups and put those users into groups. And you also want to secure this root account because it does have God mode access on it. So what you want to do is enable multi-factor authentication. So if someone steals your username and password, they will not be able to log in without multi-factor authentication. So to enable it, we just click in here and go to Manage MFA. And it says you are now accessing the security credential page for your AWS account. This is account credentials, provides unlimited access to your AWS resources. So just go ahead and hit continue. And in here, we can see the MFA, multi-factor authentication. And all you need to do is click on Activate MFA. And in here, you'll get the 3 different types. You've got virtual MFA, you've got a U2F, a security key, and you've got other hardware MFA device. I would just use the virtual MFA, and you can download the Google Authenticator app, and you can do that on the Google Play Store or on the Apple App Store. So just type in Google Authenticator. Once you've downloaded that, go ahead and hit continue. And I'm going to go ahead and hit click here, show QR code. Now, what I would do before you open that app is I'd take a photo of this QR code and store it somewhere safe. That means that if you lose your multi-factor authentication device, so if you lose your phone, for example, so long as you have access to this QR code, you can always re-enable MFA, and you don't have to worry about contacting AWS's support team. Okay, so once you've installed Google Authenticator on your phone, you'll see a screen that looks similar to this. You might not have any authentication codes in there. All you need to do in order to add one is to hit this little plus symbol console and then go ahead and hit scan barcode. And there you go. You can see this is my lovely view from our London office. There's a whole bunch of Star Wars stamps, and all I need to do is then scroll this down and have a look at the QR code. And that has now added the new MFA to the bottom of my iPhone screen, which you can see here. And then all I need to do is go ahead and enter in my MFA codes in here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. It's 537624, and then I'm just going to wait for this MFA thing to change. And my MFA code's about to change, which is why it's gone red. And now I'm going to type in the new one, which is 770 and then 626. And then all you need to do is go ahead and hit Assign MFA. And you can see it now says you have successfully assigned virtual MFA. The virtual MFA will be required during sign-in. So go ahead and hit Close. And then you'll come back to this landing page. Notice in here you can change your password. This is to change your password for the root account. In fact, everything here is for your root account. So you probably want to come out of it. Just go ahead and click on Dashboards, and you can now see that we've got a new green tick. We've activated MFA on our root account. Before we go in and get more green ticks, I just wanted to point out up here that the region is global. So whenever you're doing anything inside Identity Access Management, such as creating users or groups, it's on a global basis. They're not locked down to particular regions. You're not creating a user in Northern Virginia and then having to create the same user in Australia. So just bear that in mind as well. So the next thing we want to do is go in and create an individual IAM user. So let's click on that and go ahead and manage our users. I'm going to go ahead and add my user, and my username is just going to be my name. So Ryan.Kronenberg is what I'm going to put in here. And then I'm going to go ahead and select my AWS access type. Now, what we're using right now is called the Management Console, so the AWS Management Console. You can also enable programmatic access. So we're going to enable both just for this user. Now, we're going to use programmatic access in the EC2 section of the course. EC2 is just virtual machines. So that is coming up, but we won't cover it off in this section. But I do just want to show you what happens when you enable programmatic access. You're going to be creating an access key ID and secret access key, and you'll use these to interact with the AWS console. In here, we've got our password. I'm just going to do an auto-generated password. And in here, it says require a password reset. The user must create a new password at next sign-in. So not only does it auto-generate a password for that user, it's also going to make sure that they change it when they first sign in. Next, we're going to go ahead and add our permissions. We haven't created a group yet, so it's going to say add user to a group. Let's go ahead and create a group, and this group I'm going to call, in my group name, I'm going to call it developers. So developers. And my developers really need administrator access to AWS, and this is where we add our policies. And if it's got this little AWS logo here, it means it's an AWS managed policy. So we want to add administrator access. Now you can add but based on different job roles. So in here you can see the type, job function, and then you've got AWS manage. Try scrolling to the bottom. I'm going to guarantee you it's going to take forever. That is how many policies there are. So we're going to do administrator access, but if I was to type in something like billing, you can see a job function is in billing in here. Or if you've got your database administrator is a job function. So there is a number of different job functions to save you time. If you want to know a list of all the job functions, just type into Google IAM job functions, and it will give you the different types. So let's go ahead and create this group. We're creating the developers group, and we're giving them full administrator access. That has now created our group, and now we're going to add this user to our group. And we're going to go ahead and hit next. And we're going to go ahead and create our user. That has now added our user. In here, you'll see that we've got our access key ID and our secret access key. This is for our programmatic access to AWS. You're only ever going to see this one time. So you can just click here and download a CSV file. So you see that's downloaded down there. Store that for later. We will go through and probably create an entirely new user when we get to that section of the course. And we can also email login instructions. And if you click on that link, it's going to open up your mail client and email them login instructions as well. And if you want to see your user's password, just click on the show button, which is off to the left of the send email link. So let's go ahead and hit close. we now have our user in here. So we've got Ryan.Kronenberg. He's a member of the developers group, and nothing else has been added. If we go back to our dashboard, we can see that we've created an individual IAM user, and we've also used groups to assign permissions. I just wanted to quickly show you a bit more into policies. So we added this administrator access policy to the group when we were creating the group. If you want to see more about the policy, just click on this little down arrow. In here, this is JavaScript object notation, or JSON, which we were talking about before. And it basically is a whole bunch of key value pairs. So this is the version of the policy. This is the statement. We've got our square brackets, and in here we've got our curly brackets. And we've got more key value pairs. So these key value pairs are under the statement. So this is what we call nesting inside JSON. So we've got effect allow. The action is a star, so a wildcard. So we're saying allow, and the action, we're allowing anything. And on which resource? Well, we're allowing anything. So this is the most powerful this is the most powerful policy that you can have in AWS. You're saying allow you to do anything with any resource within AWS. So this is administrator access, or as some like to call it, God mode. So let's go back to dashboards. We've created an IAM user. We've created a group. And then the last thing we want to do is just apply an identity access management password policy. If we go ahead and click on manage password policy in here, we can now say that we want our minimum password length to be like 12 characters. We want one uppercase letter. We want one lowercase letter. We want at least one number, one alphanumeric character, etc. In here, we can have password expiration. We can prevent our password reuse. And we can have that the password expiration requires an administrator reset. So you can change in here all the different password policies. I'm going to go ahead and just hit apply. And if we go and click on our dashboard, we now have 5 green ticks. So we've achieved 5 out of 5. Now, in case you're wondering where is my actual password that I need to send to my user, if you open up that CSV file, you'll be able to see in here, here's the password that's been auto-generated. Here's my access key ID. I want you to think of this as just like a username that we're going to use to programmatically access the AWS console. And here's our secret access key. Again, this is just like a password that we're going to use to programmatically access the AWS ecosystem. And then we've got our console login link. So all you need to do is send your user this console login link, their username, and their password. If for some reason you lose that information or you didn't save it, click on users and then go ahead and click on the user in here. And then you can actually just click on their name, and in here you'll be able to go in and change their security credentials by clicking up here. So we've got our security credentials in here. Our console password, we can go ahead and hit manage, and we can actually just set it. So we can create our own custom one if we wanted. We can auto-generate a new one. And we can even enable or disable the console. And likewise with our access keys, if you've lost your access keys, because I have shown you my access key ID and secret access key, straight away what I'm going to do is make inactive, because anyone who basically has access to your access key ID and secret access key could use your AWS account, so make sure you never share that. Now with your access key ID and secret access key, you can never use this to log into the console. You can only use the console password. And again, if this access key ID and secret access key doesn't make a lot of sense right now, it will make a lot of sense later on in the course when we actually go ahead and start using it. So I'm just going to make it inactive. In fact, I'm probably just going to go in and delete it for now, and we'll go ahead and provision it later. The very last thing I want to show you is roles. Roles are a way for one AWS service to go ahead and use another AWS service. So we're going to use this in the EC2 section of the course, where we're going to allow our little virtual machine to talk to S3. Let's go ahead and just create a role. So we're going to hit create role. In here, we're going to say choose the service that will use this role. So I would like to, it's going to be EC2, because that's what we're going to use in the very next section, in 2 sections on. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And then in here, all I want to do is type in S3, and because we want S3 full access, we're going to use an AWS managed policy. Again, it's got the little icon there, which means it's an AWS managed policy. You can create your own policies, which are customer managed. We're not going to do that in this course. It's beyond the scope of this course, but it is definitely possible. Let's go ahead and hit next review. And the role name, just give it a unique name. I'm going to call it S3 underscore admin underscore and then access. And I'm going to go ahead and create the role. So that role has now been created. You can see it in here, and we're going to use it not in the next section, but the section after that. Okay, so what have we learned so far? Well, we've learned that IAM is universal. It does not apply to regions at this time. So when you create a user, you're creating that user globally. Same when you create a role or when you create a group. We learned that the root account is simply the account created when you first set up your AWS account. It has complete administrator access, and it's always using your email address. So that's sometimes called the root account email address and the password that you configured. We also learned that new users have no permissions when first created. We had to give our user Ryan Cronenberg permissions, and to do that we created a administrator access policy. We assigned that to the developers group. We also learned that new users are assigned an access key ID and secret access key when first created. They use this to programmatically access the AWS ecosystem, and again, this is completely optional. You can just say, okay, I only want console access, or I want programmatic access. So those are the two different types of access. You can have one, you can have the other, or you can have both of them at the same time. So that's console access and programmatic access. We also learned that the user access key ID and secret access key are not the same as the password. So you can't use the access key ID and secret access key to log into the console. You can only use it for programmatic access. And I'll show you what the programmatic access means and how it works later on in the course, in the EC2 section of the course. And remember that you only get to view the user's password, their access key ID, and secret access key once. If you lose them, you're going to have to regenerate them, so make sure you save that CSV file in a secure location. Always set up multi-factor authentication on your root account. Remember, your root account has God mode, so if someone hacks your email and they can do a password reset, you're going to be screwed. So you always want multi-factor authentication. The great thing is setting up multi-factor authentication on AWS is super simple. All you need is a smartphone, and you just need to download the Google Authenticator app, and then you can set up multi-factor authentication, which we saw right at the start of this lab. And then you can create and customize your own password rotation policies. So we went in and we made sure our passwords, had 12 characters. They had an uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, a number, and then a special character. So that is what we've learned so far in this lab. In the next lab, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a billing alarm. This will tell us if our AWS account is going to go over a certain threshold and give us an alert. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at how to create a billing alarm. Now, most of the lectures in this course will be using AWS free tier. However, there are some lectures where you will not be using free tier, or we might exceed the limits of free tier. And in order to just alert us when we go over the amount, what we're going to do is go ahead and set up a billing alarm. So a billing alarm is basically an amount that you set. Let's say it's going to be $10, and it will send you an alarm as soon as your AWS bill goes over that for the month. So this is a lab, and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so we're going to learn how to make a billing alarm, and it used to be really easy to set up a billing alarm, but now it's actually quite complicated. It's a much more involved process. First thing you need to do is just make sure your region is in Northern Virginia, then click up here and just go over to My Billing Dashboard. And in here, you'll be able to see your bills. This is a brand new account right now, so I don't yet have a bill. And what we want to do is we want to click on Billing Preferences across here. And then we want to receive billing alerts. So just click that checkbox and go ahead and hit Save Preferences. And once you've saved your preference, then what we want to do is go over to Services, and we want to go to CloudWatch, which is under Management and Governance.
And CloudWatch is exactly what it sounds like. It's a way of watching your cloud. This can be things like the CPU utilization of virtual machines, or it could be your billing, for example. So we're going to click on billing, which is under alarms. And essentially what we want to do is we want to create an alarm every time our AWS bill is greater than or equal to $10. So let's go ahead and create an alarm. In here, we're going to call this our estimated charges. You can change the currency in here. I'm just going to do US dollars. And then what I want is the threshold type. So we're going to make it static. And essentially the condition is whenever estimated charges is greater or greater to equal to, and then it says the default number in here is 10,000. I'm sure you don't want to wait until you get a $10,000 bill. Let's do it at $10. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and hit next. Now what we need to do is create an SNS topic, and SNS just stands for Simple Notification Services. That's all it stands for. It's basically going to send you a notification when your bill goes over $10. So we're going to create a new topic. Feel free to use the default topic name, so default CloudWatch alarms topic. In here you're going to need to enter your email address. So I'm just going to do acloudguru2020@acloud.guru. Once you've created that topic, you are going to go ahead and get an email automatically, and that will basically ask you whether or not you want to opt in to this SNS topic. You need to go in and authorize that, and that's basically allowing AWS to send you emails to that address. So you can't just spam other people's addresses. Essentially, you need to go in and authorize an SNS topic. And then what you want to do is just scroll down to the bottom and go ahead and hit next. And then the alarm name, we'll just call this billing alarm. And then for the alarm description, we could just say billing alarm for $10, and we'll go ahead and hit next. And then you can preview and create it, but essentially this is the graph. So it's saying as soon as you hit $10, and this period in here is just showing you the period of time every 6 hours. That doesn't mean it's not going to check it for every 6 hours. It's just showing you this graph essentially. You could change that to being days or minutes or whatever. But scroll all the way down the bottom and go ahead and create your alarm. And that is it. You'll be able to see your billing alarm in here. You can see that it says pending confirmation. So I need to go ahead and authorize that email. And so you'll get an email just like this. It says you've chosen to subscribe to this topic. Just go ahead and click on the confirm subscription button. And there you go. You'll get a confirmation saying subscription confirmed. And then you'll be able to get your billing alerts. So like I said, it's not as straightforward as it used to be. It used to be that you could just basically click a couple of buttons, put $10 in, and enter your email address, and it would send you billing alerts. It's more involved now. You need to use a combination of CloudWatch and SNS. But this is really useful because now you're going to get an alert every time your bill is equal to or greater than $10. So you'll be able to keep track of your costs. So that is it for this lecture. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.
Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. This lecture is on S3, and as I mentioned in the last lecture, S3 is one of the oldest AWS services, and it makes up an awful lot of the Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam. So, what is S3? Well, S3 basically stands for Simple Storage Service. So it's 3 S's, that's why it's called S3, and it provides developers and IT teams with secure, durable, highly scalable object storage. And S3 is easy to use with a simple web services interface to store and retrieve any amount of data from anywhere on the web. So what does that actually mean? Well, basically, S3 is a safe place to store your files, and that's all it means by objects. So when we say object storage, we're talking about things, flat files, basically. So Word documents, pictures, movies, etc., etc. So S3 is basically a safe place to store your files. It's object-based storage, and the data is spread across multiple devices and multiple facilities. And so the basics of S3 are as follows. It's object-based. It allows you to upload files, and your files can be anywhere from 0 bytes all the way up to 5 terabytes. There is unlimited storage, and files are stored in these things called buckets. Now, when I first heard about buckets, it sounded a bit strange, but a bucket is basically just a folder. That's all it is. So it's a folder in which to put your files. Now, the thing about buckets is that S3 is essentially a universal namespace. So buckets must be unique globally. And the reason for that is when you create a bucket, it's going to get a web address. So it's going to look exactly like this. It's going to say S3 and then hyphen, and then the region in which the bucket is, then dot amazonaws.com, and then / the bucket name, so a cloud guru. And so that's why the buckets need to be unique. Two people cannot have the same name because there's only one web address available. So you have to make sure your bucket names are unique. And when you upload a file to S3, you're going to receive a HTTP 200 code. And that's basically just saying that the upload has been successful. So that will come back to your browser. And that can be a popular exam topic as well. Moving on, I keep saying that S3 is object-based, and just to think of objects as files. And objects basically consist of the following. So we've got a key, and this is simply the name of the object, so the file name of the object. We then have the value, and this is simply the data that is made up of a sequence of bytes, so it's just the data. We then have a version ID, and this is important for versioning, and we're going to have a lab on versioning, but effectively S3 allows you to have multiple versions of your file. So you could have version 1, which says Hello Cloud Gurus, and then you could go in and upload a file with the same name and change the file so it says Hello Cloud Gurus, welcome to version 2 or something like that. And then you'll have both versions of the object in S3, and you'll be able to do version control. So you could go back to a previous version. So S3 allows you to do versioning. And like I said, we're going to have a lab on that. We also then have metadata. If you've never heard the term metadata before, it just simply means data about data. So it's data about the data that you're storing. So you may say, okay, this object belongs to the finance department. This is our payroll spreadsheet, something like that. And then it has a bunch of different sub-resources. So we have access control lists, and we also have torrents. We are going to cover off access control lists and bucket policies coming up. So now that you know what S3 is and that it's just a safe place to store your objects in the cloud, you really have to understand the data consistency model for S3 going into your exam. So how does S3 keep your data consistent? Well, basically S3 has two things. It has read after write consistency for puts of new objects, and then it has eventual consistency for overwrite puts and deletes. Now, I know what you're thinking. What does that mean? Well, the first one, read after write consistency for puts of new objects, all that means is if you upload a file to S3, you are able to read it immediately. So you are able to read it straight after writing to it, and that's basically you're just doing a put of that object into S3. Now, if you were good to go in and basically update that object or delete that object, so overwrite that object, then it's only going to be eventual consistency. So let's say we've got version 1 of a file, and then we upload version 2, and you immediately try and read that object. Basically, what's going to happen is you might get version 1 or you might get version 2, but if you wait like a second, you're always going to get version 2. So there's an eventual consistency for overwrite puts and deletes. So only when you're overwriting a file or you're deleting a file, eventually it's going to be consistent. That's all that means. So you have read after write consistency for puts of new objects, and you have eventual consistency for overwrite puts and deletes. So in other words, if you write a new file and read it immediately afterwards, you'll be able to view that data. And if you update an existing file or delete a file and read it immediately, you may get the older version or you may not. Basically, the changes can take a little bit of time to propagate. So what are the S3 guarantees? What does Amazon guarantee from S3? Well, it's built for 99.99% availability, and Amazon will guarantee 99.9% availability. And Amazon guarantees 99.9999. I'm not going to say it, but basically this is referred to as 11 nines because there's 11 nines there. Durability for S3. So just remember 11 nines. And what does that mean? Well, that means if you put your object up in S3, it's very, very unlikely that it's going to be lost. It's only going to be lost 1 in however many nines that is. So it basically guarantees the durability of your object. And then S3 has this following features. So it's got tiered storage. So it's got different storage tiers. And this is a fundamentally important topic going into your Certified Solutions Architect exam. This is worth like 4 or 5 points. You need to know the different tiers, and we'll come on to that in the next slide. We also have lifecycle management, so you can actually go through and move move your objects around 2 different storage tiers. So you could say, hey, when this file is 30 days old, move it to this tier. When it's 90 days old, archive it off to Glacier. And I'll cover what Glacier is in a second. It also allows you to do versioning, so you can have multiple versions of objects in your S3 buckets. You're able to encrypt your objects. You're allowed to encrypt them at rest, and there's different encryption mechanisms which we'll cover off in another lecture. Again, this is really important. You're able to use multi-factor authentication for deleting objects. So when you turn this on, if someone goes in to delete an object, they're going to need 2-factor authentication in which to do this. So they're going to need to use something like Google Authenticator. And then you secure your data using access control lists and bucket policies. And we're going to cover those off later on in this section of the course as well. So I talked about the different storage classes and how important they are to passing your exam. So let's cover them off now. So S3 standard, this is the one with 99.99% availability and 11 nines durability, and it's stored redundant across multiple devices in multiple facilities and is designed to sustain the loss of 2 facilities concurrently. So it is really, really highly available and highly durable. You then have S3 infrequently accessed, and this is basically for data that is accessed less frequently but requires rapid access when you need it. So you get a lower storage fee than S3, but you are charged a retrieval fee. So if you've got data that you need to be able to instantly access, but you pretty much don't use that data regularly, maybe you only need to check it at the end of every month, then you'd want S3 infrequently accessed. You then also have S3 one zone infrequently accessed, and this is when you want a really low cost option for your infrequently accessed data, and you don't even need, you don't have to worry about multiple availability zones. So it is literally just stored in one availability zone, and it's infrequently accessed, but you still need to be able to access that data instantly. And then at reInvent in 2018, Amazon released S3 Intelligent Tiering. This is a really cool technology. This is using machine learning, and basically what it does is it looks at how often you use your objects, and then it will move your objects around the different storage classes based on what it's learned. So it will move it from S3 standard to S3 infrequently accessed because it knows that you don't access those files. So that's S3 Intelligent Tiering. Those are the 4 storage classes. We then have Glacier, and Glacier comes in 2 flavors. So we've got normal S3 Glacier, and then we've got S3 Glacier Deep Archive. And so Glacier is basically for data archiving. So if you want to archive off your data, maybe you don't need it, maybe you have to hold on to it for 7 years because of some federal regulation, you would be using Glacier. Now you can store any amount of data, and it's really super, super cheap. And then your retrieval times are configurable from minutes to hours. Now with Glacier Deep Archive, that's the lowest storage lowest cost storage class that you can buy, but your retrieval time is going to be 12 hours. So if you want to get the data back using Deep Archive, you put in a request and it will come back 12 hours later. So those are the 6 different storage tiers. And you will need to remember those going into your exam. And so here is a table that compares the different storage tiers. The thing that you should really note is the first byte latency. That's how quickly you'll be able to access your data. So it's milliseconds for everything apart from S3 Glacier and Glacier Deep Archive. So it can be minutes or hours, or it could be up to 12 hours if you're using Deep Archive. So bear that in mind as well. So how are you going to be billed for S3? Well, you're charged in the following ways. You're charged in terms of storage. So the more you store in S3, the more you're going to be billed. You're also charged on the number of requests. So if you're making a lot of requests to those objects, it's going to be more expensive. You then get charged on the storage management pricing. So this is the different tiers that are available. You then also get charged on data transfer pricing, and then you also get charged for transfer acceleration and cross-region replication. And don't worry, we're going to cover exactly what those 2 things are right now. So what is cross-region replication? Well, let's say you've got a bucket and it's in US East 1, and you want to automatically replicate your objects to another bucket that's in, let's say, in Sydney. And you want to do that for high availability as well as, disaster recovery. So what will happen is as soon as you upload an object to your bucket in US East 1 and you've got cross-region replication turned on, those objects will automatically be replicated over to your bucket in Sydney. And we're going to have a lab on that coming up. We then also have S3 transfer acceleration. This enables fast, easy, and secure transfers of files over long distances between your end users and an S3 bucket. And basically, it's taking advantage of Amazon's CloudFront's globally distributed edge locations. And then the data arrives at an edge location. It's routed to Amazon S3 over an optimized network path. And essentially what they're doing is they're using the Amazon backbone network. So let's have a look at how this works. We've got our users all around the world, and then we've got our edge locations. And essentially, if you turn on transfer acceleration, they are uploading those their files to the edge locations rather than to the S3 bucket itself. And then this goes over Amazon's backbone network, so Amazon's own network, straight back to where your bucket is located. And can really speed up your users' upload times. And we're going to have a lab on that, and we're going to see how it works from all the different locations in the world coming up in this section of the course. So you've done really, really well. We're at the end of this lecture. Let's look at my exam tips. So just remember that S3 is object-based. It allows you to upload files. Those files can be 0 bytes to 5 terabytes in size. There's unlimited storage, and your files are stored in these things called buckets. And a bucket is basically just a folder in the cloud. Now, each bucket has to have its own unique name, and that is to say that S3 is a universal namespace. So you must have a unique name for your buckets. And your link, when you create a bucket, it's going to generate a HTTPS link, and it's going to look like this. So it's going to be S3-EU West-1, so S3 and then the region, and then .amazonaws.com / and then your bucket name. Moving on, just remember that S3, because it is object-based, it's not suitable to install an operating system or a database on. So it's not, that's not that type of storage. For that, you will want block-based storage. This is object-based storage. So essentially, it's only used to store files. You're not going to install an operating system on S3, and you're not going to use it to host a database. And when you successfully upload an object to S3, you're going to get a HTTP 200 status code. Also, remember that you can protect your objects by turning on multi-factor authentication delete. That's really important to remember going into your exam. So that's how you can protect your objects so that somebody doesn't go in and accidentally delete them. They'll need to do multi-factor authentication. Remember the key fundamentals of S3. So what makes up an S3 object? Well, we have the key, and this is simply the name of the object. We then have the value, and this is simply the data and is made up of a sequence of bytes. We then have the version ID. This is important for versioning. We have metadata, which is data about the data that you're storing. We then have some sub-resources within here. So we've got access control lists and torrents. And that access control list basically is the permissions of that object. And you can lock each object down individually. So you can do it at a bucket level, and you can also do it at an object level as well. We're going to cover that off later on in the course. Now, this is really important to remember the consistency model. So it's read after write consistency for puts of new objects. So as soon as you create a new object, you'll be able to read that object immediately. But if you update an object or delete an object and you try and read it immediately, you're going to only get eventual consistency. So you might get the older object, or you might still see the deleted file. But if you wait about a second, it's going to be consistent. So you get eventual consistency. And pretty much the most important thing to remember going into your exam are the different storage classes. So we've got S3 standard. This is 99.99% availability, 11 nines durability. We then have S3 infrequently access. This is basically where you need, you're going to pay a lower fee than standard S3, but you need instant access, and you are charged a retrieval fee as well. We then have S3 one zone IA, or one zone infrequently accessed. This is where you want a lower cost option for your infrequently accessed data, but you don't require multiple availability zones.
And just so you guys know, prior to S3 One Zone Infrequently Accessed, we had a storage class called S3 Reduced Redundancy Storage, or RRS. That service still does exist, but it is being phased out. I just did the exam the other day, and I was surprised to see it still mentioning RRS because it is being phased out. But just think, if you do see RRS in your exam, just think of S3 One Zone Infrequently Accessed Storage. That's basically more or less the same service. They're not quite the same because they have different availability, SLAs, etc. But essentially, it's a place where you put your files where you don't care if you're going to lose them. If durability is not an issue, you just want cheap cost of storage, then you want S3 One Zone IA, or sometimes it's referred to as S3 RRS.
We then have S3 Intelligent Tiering, and this is basically using machine learning, and it will move objects around the different tiers of S3 to maximize your cost savings. We then have S3 Glacier. This is for data archival, and you can configure your retrieval times. It can be anywhere from minutes to hours. And then if you want the lowest cost storage available, then you want S3 Glacier Deep Archive, and this is Amazon's lowest cost storage class where a retrieval time of 12 hours is acceptable. And then finally, the one thing I would say is go and read the S3 FAQs before taking the exam. S3 makes up quite a bit of the exam. It's going to come up an awful lot. So just have a read through the S3 FAQs. Now, of course, the best way to learn anything with AWS is to get our hands dirty. So in the next lecture, what we're going to do is we're going to go in and create an S3 bucket. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to go ahead and create our first S3 bucket. So this is a lab, and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console, and the first thing I want you to note is my region. So going forward throughout the rest of this course, I would recommend that you change your region to Northern Virginia. The reason for that is Northern Virginia is where AWS roll out all their new products first. If you select a region that's relatively new, such as Stockholm, you might not have all the products and services that are available to you. So what we want to do is we want to find S3. So S3 is a storage service, and it is under storage. So we're going to click on storage in here, and that will open up our S3, basically our console. Now you can see up here that this has already changed to global. So when you create a bucket, you do choose which region it is, but when you go and view all your buckets, you get a global view. So that's all that is. So let's go ahead and create a bucket. Now if you remember from the last lecture, I said bucket names must be unique. So if we type in test bucket, for example, and hit create, it's going to say that that bucket name already exists. So you must have a unique name. Now, someone has taken a Cloud Guru from me, unfortunately, but I'm going to do a Cloud Guru 2019. Let's try that. And in here, we can choose our region. So I'm going to do mine in US East 1, so Northern Virginia. And I don't have any existing buckets, so I'm not going to copy any settings. Let's go ahead and hit next. In here, okay, we can see that the bucket name already exists. I'm going to put my name after that. So 2019 Ryan. Oh my God, I swear this isn't my bucket. Somebody has just taken the name. So I'm going to do Ryan Kronenberg, and then I'm going to put pi in there, 3.1415, etc., etc. So there we go. Now I've got a unique bucket name. So in here, we've got all our different properties. I'm going to show you how to change this after we create a bucket. So we could turn on versioning, we could turn on server access logging, and this basically logs requests for your access to your bucket. We could start doing tags, we could do object level tagging, we could automatically enable encryption. You've got advanced options in here, so we can permanently allow objects in this bucket to be locked. I'm not going to do any of this. I'm just going to go ahead and hit next. In here, this is really important. This is quite a new screen, but basically, if you want to make any of your objects public, so if you want to be able to view them, you have to make sure all these boxes are unticked. Now, for now, we're just going to leave them all as ticked, and I'll show you how we can resolve that a little bit later. So let's go ahead and hit next, and this will just review all our settings. Let's go ahead and hit create bucket. So there we go. I've created my very first bucket. So let's go ahead and click in here. So this is a bucket. This is where we can upload our files. Why don't we go ahead and do that first? So let's click upload and let's go and add some files. Okay, so I've got two files in here. I've got a picture of me and Faye at Replay. Faye is our instructor for the Developer Associate and SysOps Administrator Associate, and I work with her in the London office. And I've also got a photo of me and my brother meeting Jeff Barr. Let's go ahead and hit upload. Now you can see here we're going to get a success, and this is basically sent back a HTTP 200 code to our browser saying that these objects have been uploaded successfully. So if we click on the first object, we'll be able to see a whole bunch of different information. So we can see in here the key, and so the key is its name. So it's called fayryanreplay.jpg. We can see the size. We can see if it's got an expiration date. We can see a whole bunch of different objects, a whole bunch of different data. And in here, you've got the object URL. So if we clicked on this and tried to access this object, it says access denied, access denied. Now, the reason this object is access is denied is because we haven't made this object public. So it's really important to understand that whenever you put stuff into S3, it takes quite a bit of work to make those things public. And I'll show you how we can make it public in a second. So I've just gone back. If I click back on my bucket up here, and if I click on here, I can go and do some actions to this object. So I can download, I can open it, I can change the storage class, I can go ahead and make it public. Let's go ahead and try and make this object public. So I clicked on make public, and you can see down here it says an error, 100% failed. Now, if you remember when we created our bucket, we had all those checkboxes. So if we go back to S3 and we click in here, we can go and edit our public access settings. And when you go and edit it, by default, these are now unchecked. So if you go ahead and hit save, it's going to ask you to confirm. So I'm going to go in and type confirm. And there you go. You can see now that objects can now be public. So the access level has been changed. So let's go back into our bucket by clicking in here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make me and Faye's this object public. So I want to be able to view it. So I'm going to go to actions and I'm going to go down to make public. I'm going to go ahead and click on make public. You can see that has now been successful. If I click on the object and click on the link, it should load a picture of me and Faye. And there we are at reInvent for 2018. This is the big party at the end of reInvent's called Replay. And you can see we've got these shirts on that light up. So they were battery powered and basically lit up our logo. It was pretty cool. So I'm just going to go back and I'm going to go over to my bucket again. I'm going to do the same with the photo of me and Jeff. So I'm just going to go ahead and make public. And this is how you go ahead and make our objects public on an individual basis. So I click on here. We should be able to see there's me and my brother with Jeff Barr, and this was at reInvent in 2017. So let's go back to our bucket and look what else we can do on an object level basis. So we can go and click on here and we can go to the properties and we can change things like the storage class. So I could say, okay, I want this to use intelligent tiering. We can do this on an object level as well as a bucket level. So I'm going to do this on an object level. I'm going to turn on intelligent tiering. And so that has just done it for this object. If I click on here, you can see storage class intelligent tiering. Click on the one with Jeff, it's just standard. So far we're editing everything at an object level. If we wanted to change the properties at a bucket level, we would click up here. So these are the properties, permissions, and management. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these. We will cover off versioning in this course. We will cover off static website hosting, and we will cover off some parts of encryption. That's going to be the next lecture, as well as transfer acceleration. That's what you need to know. Those three are the main ones that you need to know in order to pass your Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam. If you want to learn all about S3, we do have a S3 deep dive course on the A Cloud Guru platform. In here, we control the permissions for our buckets. So this allows us to edit the public settings. We then can also do access control lists. Access control lists can go all the way down to an object, an individual object. So you could block one spreadsheet, but allow other spreadsheets to be read. Bucket policies work on an entire bucket level. So you could put a bucket policy in to make all objects in the bucket public. And we will do that when we create a serverless website at the very last section. Likewise, we'll look at cores in the very last section of the course when we create our serverless website. And in here, we've got our management. This is where we set up lifecycle rules. This is where we set up replication, so cross-region replication. location. We are going to cover off both of these in this section of the course. So what have we learned about S3? Let's summarize. So onto my exam tips. What have we learned? We did cover off a lot of these in the last lecture, but I'm just going to remind you. So buckets are a universal namespace. You can't share the same name. When you upload an object to S3, your browser is going to get a HTTP 200 code. There's a bunch of different storage classes. You need to remember these going into your exam. So we've got S3, S3 infrequently accessed, S3 infrequently accessed one zone, and we then have Glacier. We have different flavors of Glacier depending on our retrieval times. And then finally, we learned that you can control access to your buckets either using a bucket ACL or using bucket policies. And we looked at that briefly. We will use bucket policies when we go to the serverless section of the course where we create a serverless website. So we will look at that later on in this course. So that is it for this lecture, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture, which is about encryption. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to learn about S3 security as well as encryption. So we learned in the last lecture that by default, all buckets when we create them are private, and that was those 4 little checkboxes. And you can set up access control to your buckets using bucket policies and access control lists. Now, bucket policies work at a bucket level, whereas access control lists go all the way down to individual objects. And S3 buckets can be configured to create access logs, which logs all the requests made to your S3 bucket. So if someone tries to access an object, that is going to be logged. And this can be sent to another bucket or even another bucket in another account. So if you want to log who's accessing your objects in your S3 bucket, you can definitely do that. And you can store those logs in an S3 bucket in your primary AWS account, or you can actually set it up in a different AWS account. And so this is really, really important to understand the 2 different types of encryption, because you will be tested on this in the exam. So there's encryption in transit. Now, whenever you go and visit a website, if you're going to HTTPS, it means that the traffic is going to be encrypted in transit. So basically, between your computer and the server, that traffic is encrypted. No one who's eavesdropping on that will be able to break it and understand what you're looking at. That's why we use HTTPS. So encryption in transit is always achieved by SSL or TLS, as it's also referred to. So that's whenever you're browsing using HTTPS, that is encryption at transit. Encryption at rest is where we encrypt the data that's being stored. So let's say we have a Word document that's being stored on a hard disk drive. If there's no encryption at rest and somebody steals that hard disk drive, they will be able to access that Word document. So I'm talking about encryption at rest in terms of the way it works with S3. There's 2 different ways that we can do this. We can do it on the server side, or we can do it on the client side. The server side is where Amazon help you encrypt the object, and on the client side, it's where you encrypt the object and then upload it to S3. So let's look at it on the server side, and there's 3 different types. There's S3 managed keys. This is where Amazon manage the keys for you automatically, so you don't need to worry about the keys at all. When we talk about keys, a key is just a way of encrypting the object and then decrypting it. So it's just like you would use a key with a lock. So this is where Amazon manage all the keys. So that's S3 managed keys. It's sometimes referred to as SSE S3, which is server-side encryption S3. We then have AWS Key Management Service. This is where you and Amazon manage the keys together. And this is called Managed Keys Server-Side Encryption with KMS. And then we have server-side encryption with customer-provided keys. This is where you actually give Amazon your own keys that you manage, and you can encrypt your S3 objects doing that as well. And then, like I said, you can actually encrypt the object yourself on the client side. So you might do this on your Mac or your PC or whatever, and then you upload that object to S3. So there's 4 ways of really doing encryption. There's server-side encryption. So we've got SSE S3, SSE KMS, and SSE customer managed keys or customer provided keys. And then we also have encryption using client-side encryption, where you basically encrypt the object and then upload it to S3. So let's go ahead and have a look at how we can do this in the AWS console. I'm in the AWS console. If we want to go to S3, it's always under storage. So just go ahead and click in there. And we've got the bucket that we created in the last lecture. If we click in the bucket, we can go and click on our individual objects, and we can go and change the encryption by clicking in here. And here you can see we've got AES 256, or we can start using the AWS KMS service, and we can use our own custom keys, or we can use the AWS provided keys. So those are the three different types. Now, KMS is really beyond the scope of this course. We do cover it in an awful lot of detail in the Certified Security Specialty course. I highly recommend getting the Certified Security Specialty certificate. Who doesn't want to be secure in the AWS cloud? It is really, really valuable. So maybe check that out once you've passed your Solutions Architect Associate exam. So I'm going to click on AES 256, and I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and I'm going to go ahead and hit change. And that is it. It is simple. It is that easy. You can see in here it's been 100% success. Again, if I uncheck this and check on it again, you'll be able to see that it is now encrypted. So in the unlikely event that somebody was to run into or break into AWS's data center and somehow get a hard disk drive, my file was on that drive, they would not be able to decrypt this file. They can only decrypt it by using the AWS key. So that is it for this lecture, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at versioning. So before we get started, let's just see what we can do with versioning. So using versioning with S3, basically this is going to store all versions of an object and including all writes, even if you delete the object. And we'll see that when we log into the console. So versioning is a great backup tool. And once versioning is enabled on a bucket, it cannot be disabled. It can only be suspended. So you can only suspend it. You can't go in and disable versioning. You have to delete the bucket and create a new one to completely turn it off. It also integrates with lifecycle rules. Now we're going to cover that in the next lecture as well. So we'll look at how we can use lifecycle rules and versioning to move things to Glacier. And versioning also comes with MFA delete capability, and this basically uses multi-factor authentication, which can be used to provide an additional layer of security to stop people from going in and accidentally deleting objects. So to permanently delete something, you would need multi-factor authentication to do that. So this is a lab. Let's log into the AWS console and have a look at versioning. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console. Now if I click on services, I can see S3 under storage. So let's go ahead and click on there. I'm going to create a new bucket for this lecture. I'm going to call it A Cloud Guru Versioning 2019 RJK, which is my initials. Hopefully that will be available. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit create immediately. Okay, there we go. So it's created my bucket. Notice the different levels of access. So by default, our bucket and objects are not public. If we go ahead and create a bucket, the bucket and the objects within them are not public. So we do want to change that because we're going to need to look at all the different versions of our files. So we want to just click in here and go Edit Public Access Settings. Make sure all these boxes are unticked. Go ahead and type the word confirm and go ahead and hit confirm. And that will then change your access levels so objects can now be public. So let's go into this bucket, and the very first thing we're going to do is turn on versioning. So if we go over to properties, you'll see versioning here. It's the very first box inside properties. And let's go ahead and click on here, and we can go and hit enable versioning, and we'll go ahead and hit save. Now notice that we can only enable or suspend, we can't turn it off. So we now have versioning enabled on this bucket. Now we don't have anything in this bucket, so let's go ahead and upload a file to this bucket. So I'm going to go ahead and hit upload. And I'm going to add this file, and it's just is hellocloudgurus.txt. And I'm going to go ahead and hit upload. So now that that has uploaded, let's make it public and have a look at it. So we'll just click on the object and go make public and hit make public. And then we can uncheck and then check again to get the link. And you can click on the link in here. And there you go. It says, hello, Cloud Gurus. This is version 1. So it's a very, very simple TXT file. So what I'm going to do is just go back. And I'm going to go back to my bucket, and we're going to upload a new version of this file. So I'm quickly just going to change this file. So let's change this file to say this is version 2. This is a better version, something like that. I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and I'm going to save anyway. And now I'm going to go ahead and upload this to S3. So I'm back in the console. I'm going to go and hit upload. And we're going to add this file, and let's add it again and hit upload. So that has now loaded the file. Now, the first thing I want to ask you is, what do you think has happened to the permissions on this file? Do you think this file is still public, or do you think it is it's changed the permissions? Well, if we click in there and we click on the actual link, you can see that the file is now is access denied. So it has, by uploading the new file, it has changed the permissions on that file. You can't access it. So you need to just go back and basically go in and enable it so that it is public. So we'll just go here, go to Actions, Make Public, and Make Public. And there we go. And then I'm going to click on the link again and click on the link again. And here we go. We can see that it says, hello, Cloud Gurus. This is version 2. This is a better version. So if I go back, you want to be able to see the versions. And you'll notice that once we turn versioning on, we've got this versions sort of UI here that appears. And right now, it's not showing us the version. So if we click on Show, we can now see our different versions. So we've got our version 1 here. And you can see the latest version here. And notice that they've got different version IDs. And also note the different sizes. So actually, the size of our S3 bucket now is the sum of these two different versions. So that's something to bear in mind from an architectural point of view. If you have versioning turned on in a bucket and you're making constant changes to large files, the size of your bucket is going to start going up exponentially. So do bear that in mind when you're architecting. Maybe you don't need versioning turned on, or maybe you need to enable a lifecycle policy to retire old versions quickly. We're going to look at lifecycle policies in the very next lecture. So let's go ahead and have, I'm going to go ahead and upload a third version. So we're going to have 3 versions. So I'm quickly just going to make a change to that text file. So it's in here, hello Cloud Gurus, this is version 2. Let's change this to version 3, and this is the best version. So best version. And then I might just add some random stuff in here just to make it even bigger. So I've saved that now, and what I'm going to do is go back over to S3, and let's go ahead and hit upload and hit add files, and we're going to upload this file and hit upload again. And now you will be able to see that this is now the latest version. It's 87 bytes in size. That was the previous version. That was the previous version. Again, let's actually just test that we can access it. So if we click in here and then click on the link, you see we're going to get an access denied. So we do need to go and make that public again. So we'll click on here and go Actions, Make Public, and go ahead and hit Make Public. One thing to note, if we go back to this version, the original version that we had, and we click on the link, we can see that it's version 1 and that it is still public. So when we're uploading the newest version, it's automatically going to be private, but the older versions permissions don't change as well. So let's click in here. We can see our 3 different versions. Now, if we wanted to get rid of a version or get rid of a file, let's actually just go to hide here. So we turn versioning off. If we were to click in here and go Actions, Delete, what's going to happen is let's hit delete. So the bucket appears empty, but it's not actually empty if we go to show versions. And what we've actually done is we've just placed a delete marker over, and a delete marker is simply a new version. So we still have our 3 different versions in here, even though that we've deleted that file. And the way we would restore this file is if we go in and delete the delete marker. So let's go in here and hit delete and hit delete. And that has now restored it to the latest version, to version 3. Likewise, if we go in here and go Actions, Delete, we can actually go in and delete this individual version. So we've actually deleted that version now. We haven't placed a delete marker over it because we've clicked on the Show Versions. And now this is the latest version, version 2. And if we click on that, we should be able to see version 2. So let's go to my exam tips. So what are my exam tips? Well, just remember that versioning stores all versions of an object, including any writes, and even if you delete an object, it's going to place a delete marker over that object, but the versions that existed before it will still exist. It's a fantastic backup tool, and once enabled, versioning cannot be disabled, it can only be suspended. It integrates with lifecycle rules, which we're going to look at in the very next lecture, and this is the most important for the exam. Just remember that versioning has multi-factor authentication authentication delete capability. And this basically uses multi-factor authentication in order to delete a file. So if someone wants to delete a file, they'll have to provide MFA in order to do it. And this can be used to provide an additional layer of security. It's critical to remember that going into your exam. So now that we know about versioning, let's go ahead and have a look at lifecycle rules. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to look at lifecycle management with S3. So this is a lab and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so I'm logged into the AWS console. If you just go to S3, you'll be able to see the buckets that we created in the last couple of lectures. I'm going to go into my versioning bucket that has my objects in it, and I'm just going to go over to management, and in here we can see our lifecycle rules. So let's go ahead and add a lifecycle rule, and it says here you can use lifecycle rules to manage your objects. And essentially what it does is it's going to automate transitioning your objects to different tiers of storage. And then once you, when you specify it, it could expire your objects as well. So let's go ahead and hit add a lifecycle rule. I'm going to call it my lifecycle rule, something like that, rule. And I'm going to go ahead, and before I hit next, you could put in tags or prefixes in here. So if a specific object is tagged, it might be any object belonging to the finance department, for example. This lifecycle rule would then only apply to those tags. So bear that in mind as well. So let's go ahead and hit next. In here, we've got our storage class transitions. So we can have lifecycle rules enabled for just the current version or previous versions or both. Let's go ahead and do both. So we're going to do current version and previous version. And then in here, we add our transitions. So let's do a transition for our current version. So we're going to say from S3, normal S3, after the object is created, we're going to transition to standard infrequently access after 30 days. And we're then going to transition it from standard infrequently access to Glacier after 60 days. And then in here, we've got our previous versions of our objects. So we're going to add in a transition, and we'll do exactly the same. So 60 and 30 for these two different tiers. So there we go, 60 and 30. Let's go ahead and hit next. And then we can also configure expiration. So we can actually expire our objects in both current versions and previous versions. So we might want to do that 425 days from the date of which the object was created. And for previous versions, we're going to permanently delete a previous version also after 425 days. You can also click in here to say clean up incomplete multi-part uploads. This is when you're uploading a file in multiple parts and you split it up, and it will actually upload faster if you do it that way. But sometimes you can have files that just didn't get uploaded correctly. And so if you click in here, clean up incomplete multi-part uploads, it will basically go in after 7 days from the start of the upload and delete those files. So let's go ahead and hit next. We can review everything in here. So we've got our, the name is my lifecycle rule, the scope is across the whole bucket, and these are all our different transitions. And then we go ahead and hit save. And that has now created our lifecycle rule to the whole bucket. And you can see the actions for our current versions as well as for our previous versions. So that's all lifecycle rules are. You basically set up a lifecycle rule to move things around from different storage tiers and eventually archive it off to Glacier. You can also use it to permanently delete your objects as well. So what are my exam tips? So my exam tips. Well, just remember what lifecycle management is. So it basically allows you to automate moving your objects between the different storage tiers. It also can be used in conjunction with versioning. So you don't need versioning turned on, but if you do have it turned on, you can use it in conjunction. So you can do it with your current objects as well as previous versions. And like I just said, it can be applied to current versions and previous versions as well. So that is it for this lecture, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to look at lifecycle management with S3. So this is a lab and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so I'm logged into the AWS console. If you just go to S3, you'll be able to see the buckets that we created in the last couple of lectures. I'm going to go into my versioning bucket that has my objects in it, and I'm just going to go over to management, and in here we can see our lifecycle rules. So let's go ahead and add a lifecycle rule, and it says here you can use lifecycle rules to manage your objects, and essentially what it does is it's going to automate transitioning your objects to different tiers of storage, and then once you when you specify it, it could expire your objects as well. So let's go ahead and hit add a lifecycle rule. I'm going to call it my lifecycle rule, something like that, rule. And I'm going to go ahead, and before I hit next, you could put in tags or prefixes in here. So if a specific object is tagged, it might be any object belonging to the finance department, for example. This lifecycle rule would then only apply to those tags. So bear that in mind as well. So let's go ahead and hit next. In here, we've got our storage class transitions. So we can have lifecycle rules enabled for just the current version or previous versions or both. Let's go ahead and do both. So we're going to do current version and previous version. And then in here, we add our transitions. So let's do a transition for our current version. So we're going to say from S3, normal S3, after the object is created, we're going to transition to standard infrequently access after 30 days. And we're then going to transition it from standard infrequently access to Glacier after 60 days. And then in here, we've got our previous versions of our objects. So we're going to add in a transition, and we'll do exactly the same. So 60 and 30 for these two different tiers. So there we go, 60 and 30. Let's go ahead and hit next. And then we can also configure expiration. So we can actually expire our objects in both current versions and previous versions. So we might want to do that 425 days from the date of which the object was created. And for previous versions, we're going to permanently delete a previous version also after 425 days. You can also click in here to say clean up incomplete multi-part uploads. This is when you're uploading a file in multiple parts and you split it up, and it will actually upload faster if you do it that way. But sometimes you can have files that just didn't get uploaded correctly. And so if you click in here, clean up incomplete multi-part uploads, it will basically go in after 7 days from the start of the upload and delete those files. So let's go ahead and hit next. We can review everything in here. So we've got our, the name is my lifecycle rule, the scope is across the whole bucket, and these are all our different transitions. And then we go ahead and hit save. And that has now created our lifecycle rule to the whole bucket. And you can see the actions for our current versions as well as for our previous versions. So that's all lifecycle rules are. You basically set up a lifecycle rule to move things around from different storage tiers and eventually archive it off to Glacier. You can also use it to permanently delete your objects as well. So what are my exam tips? So my exam tips, well, just remember what lifecycle management is. So it basically allows you to automate moving your objects between the different storage tiers. It also can be used in conjunction with versioning. So you don't need versioning turned on, but if you do have it turned on, you can use it in conjunction. So you can do it with your current objects as well as previous versions. And like I just said, it can be applied to current versions and previous versions as well. So that is it for this lecture, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at cross-region replication. So this is a lab and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console, and if I just click on S3, I'll be able to see my buckets. Let's just create a new bucket just so I can show you. So we'll do cross-region replication and then just some random numbers. I'm going to go ahead and hit create. Now, to enable cross-region replication, we need to go into the bucket. We need to go over to management, and we need to click on replication. And this is where we create our cross-region replication rules. So let's go ahead and add a rule. And you'll see that this bucket doesn't have versioning enabled, and cross-region replication requires versioning to be enabled on the bucket. So I can just click in here to enable versioning, but let's go back to the bucket that we created that we were doing with our versioning lab. So a Cloud Guru versioning in here. I'm going to go over to management and I'm going to set up my replication rules. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to show you we've already got an object in the bucket. We've already got two versions of this object. And what we're going to do is we're going to enable cross-region replication. And what do you think will happen to these two objects? Do you think they'll be replicated automatically, or do you think we'll need to go in and do some changes? Well, let's go over to replication, hit add rule, and we're going to replicate the entire bucket. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Of course, you can replicate based on prefixes or tags. So if you had a tag on an individual object, maybe the finance department, it would only replicate those objects. In here, we have no destination buckets. So you can click in here and you could do it in buckets in an account or buckets in another AWS account. I'm just going to go ahead and hit create bucket. And in here, I'm going to create my DNS bucket. So I'm going to call it cross region replication, and then a whole bunch of random numbers, and then we need to select the region. Now note that it will not let me select the region that I'm currently in. It has to be in a different region. Now I'm going to replicate this to Ireland, so I'm going to pick the Irish region. So go ahead and hit, before I hit next, just note that you can change the storage class for your replicated objects. So you might want it to go from S3 to S3 infrequently accessed, and you can also change ownership. I'm going to leave everything as default. In here we need to select our IAM role. We're going to create a new role, which will automatically create a role within Identity Access Management, allowing us to do the replication. And in here, we've got to give our replication rule a name. So I'm going to call it CRR Ireland, something like that, Ireland. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit next. We can review everything, and then all we have to do is go ahead and hit save. It can take a few moments to set that up, but once it's set up, it is ready to go. So it will look like this. So you can see here our source, our destination, and our permissions, and we can edit the settings in here. If we go back over to S3, we'll be able to see our new bucket. So here it is. Note that it has automatically got the same permissions as the other one. And if we go into it, we can't see any objects. And if we even go and look at the different versions, there are no objects in there. So what this means is that when we set up cross-region replication, essentially it's not going to do the objects that are already in that bucket. So you would have to go in and upload those manually. Let's go and upload a file. So we're going to upload version 3. I'm going to go ahead and hit open and hit upload. And you can see that that's now the latest version. If we click on the file, we should be able, we're going to get the permissions error because we haven't made it public. Let's go ahead and make this object public. So go actions, make public, and make public. And so now if we go in and have a look at the file, we'll be able to see, here it is, hello Cloud Gurus, this is version 3, this is the best version. Let's go and see what has just happened with our bucket. So if we go back over here and we go over to cross-region replication, you'll be able to see it in here, and it is going to be the latest version. So as soon as we start making changes to a bucket with cross-region replication turned on, those changes will automatically be replicated. Let's go back to our bucket and go and have a look at the different versions. If we actually turn versioning off, or we'll hide versioning and go over to here and go actions delete, let's see if that is going to delete the object in the other bucket. So we can see it here. It's got a delete marker over it. We've got the 3 different versions. If we go back to S3 and go to our bucket with cross-region replication, you can see that the delete marker has not been replicated. So if you do put a delete marker in the your original bucket, it's not going to replicate that delete marker to the other bucket. And that's been done deliberately by Amazon to stop people from accidentally replicating deletes from one bucket to another. Let's try one last thing where we go in and delete the actual version. So if we go in here and we go ahead and we can delete our delete marker, so that will restore our object. And then if we actually go in and delete the latest version, let's see if that will automatically delete in the cross-region replication bucket as well. So if we go back over here and click on cross-region replication, you can see that it is still the latest version. So basically, once you turn cross-region replication on, it's not going to replicate delete markers, and it's not going to replicate when you go in and delete individual versions. So let's go over to my exam tips. So on to my exam tips. So just remember with cross-region replication that versioning must be enabled on both the source and destination bucket. Your regions have to be unique, and then files in an existing bucket are not replicated automatically. So we saw that when we turned it on, that file wasn't automatically replicated, but when we added a new file, that new file was automatically replicated to the region in Ireland. So all subsequent updated files will be replicated automatically. Also remember that delete markers are not replicated. So if you do a delete marker, it's not going to be replicated to your destination bucket, and also that deleting individual versions or delete markers will also not be replicated. So that is it for this lecture, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture where we look at transfer acceleration. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture we're going to look at S3 transfer acceleration. So what is S3 transfer acceleration? Well, we did talk about it in a little bit of detail in the S3 101, but essentially it utilizes the CloudFront Edge network to accelerate your uploads into S3. And instead of uploading directly to an S3 bucket, you can use a distinct URL to upload directly to an edge location, which will then transfer that file to S3. And you'll get a distinct URL to upload. So it might look something like this, acloudguru.s3-accelerate.amazonaws.com. And we're going to see that when we go over to Google. So just a reminder as to how it works. We've got a bucket, let's say it's in Ireland or in the UK. We've got our users all around the world. Our users will upload to an edge location first. That will then upload the file across Amazon's backbone network directly to our S3 bucket. And what's really cool about transfer acceleration is Amazon has built a tool that allows us to test it. So let's go over to Google and check that out. Okay, so I've typed in S3 transfer acceleration tool into Google, and you can see the link here. And it is actually hosted in an S3 bucket. So if you go ahead and click on it, it will load this page. And it's going to take about 5 or 6 minutes to actually start or to actually finish. But basically, it's going to compare your upload, doing it directly to all these different regions compared to if you turn on S3 transfer acceleration. So I'm just going to pause the video for 5 minutes and wait for this to finish. Okay, so that has now completed. So you can see if I'm based in London right now, and if I was uploading to S3 directly, that would be my speed. And if I used S3 transfer acceleration, then it would be 137% faster to Northern Virginia. It'd be 218% faster to San Francisco, 173% faster to Oregon. It's actually slower to Dublin, and this can be explained just by a sort of normal network traffic. So basically, the regions that are closest to you and where you physically are, sometimes it can be a bit slower. It really just depends. But in most cases, you can see basically everywhere it is faster. So that is S3 transfer acceleration. And in terms of my exam tips, just remember exactly what it is. So you've got your users, you've got your edge locations, and your users upload their big files to the edge locations, which then traverse Amazon's backbone network and will upload those files directly to your S3 bucket in the region that you specify. So that is it for this lecture, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, let's move on to CloudFront. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. This is a theoretical lecture on CloudFront. So what is CloudFront? We have covered this off in a little bit of detail, but now we're going to deep dive on CloudFront. So CloudFront is a content delivery network, or CDN. And basically, a content delivery network is a system of distributed servers, or a network, that delivers web pages and other web content to a user based on the geographic locations of the user, the origin of the web page, and the content delivery server. So let's have a look at what a CDN looks like. So say we've got our website, which is hosted in London, and we've got our users who are all around the world. And our users, when they go to our website, they're going to go directly to London and pull that content down. So that's what happens when you do not have a CDN enabled. Basically, if you have your web servers in London and you've got all your media files, so your images, your videos, etc., every single individual has to go and essentially they're connecting into that server across the internet and they're pulling those files down literally across oceans, and it can take time to load. So before we explore what CloudFront is and how it works, we need to understand some key terminology. I'm going to start with edge location. So I'm sure you know what an edge location is by now, but let's just explain it. So this is basically a location where content is going to be cached. And this is separate to an AWS region or availability zone. An origin is the origin of all the files that the CDN will distribute. So this could be an S3 bucket, an EC2 instance, an elastic load balancer, or even Route 53. And in the next lecture, we're going to go in and create, we're going to use an S3 bucket as our origin. And then finally, we have our distributions. And this is the name that's given to the CDN, which consists of, essentially, it's a collection of edge locations. So we're going to create a distribution. We'll do that in the next lecture. So let's have a look at how CloudFront actually works. So now we've got our web server in London, we've got our users all over the world, and we've got our edge locations. Now, our first user will do a query to the edge location. It will say, hey, I want to watch this video. Do you have a copy of this video? If the edge location does not have a copy of that, what will happen is the edge location will download that video to the edge location, and it will be cached there. And it's going to be cached for the time to live, which is always in seconds. And we're going to look at how we can configure that in the next lecture. So basically, it's going to be cached there, let's say for 48 hours or 72 hours. And what that means is if another user then queries that edge location for the same video, that video is already downloaded to the edge location, and that user will be able to download it a lot quicker because you don't have to go all the way to London to get it. It could be cached in US East 1, or it could be cached in South America or in South Africa, etc., etc., etc. So that's CloudFront, and that's how it works. It can be used to deliver your entire website, including dynamic, static, and streaming and interactive content using a global network of edge locations. And a request for your content is automatically routed to the nearest edge location, so content is delivered with the best possible performance. So you get really good performance out of CloudFront. With CloudFront, you get two different types of distributions. You've got your web distributions. This is typically used for websites, and that's what we're going to do in the next lecture. And then you've also got your RTMP distributions. This is used for Adobe, and it's used for media streaming, essentially. So we will see that again in the next lecture. So what are my exam tips? Well, just remember what an edge location is. This is the location where content will be cached. This is separate to an AWS region or availability zone. Remember what an origin is. This is the origin of all the files that the CDN will distribute. This will can either be an S3 bucket, or it could be an EC2 instance, or an elastic load balancer, or Route 53. So just remember what that is. And then also remember that a distribution is the name that's given to the CDN, which is a collection of edge locations. And then a web distribution is typically used for websites, whereas RTMP is used for media streaming. And then finally, you should also remember that edge locations are not just read-only. You can write to them too, i.e. you can put objects to them. And we did that in the last lecture when we were using transfer acceleration. And objects are going to be cached for the time to live, the TTL value. And we'll look at how we can configure that in the next lecture. And then finally, you can clear cached objects. You can invalidate an object, but you are going to be charged if you do that. And that's a really important exam topic, that you can invalidate cached content. So if you've uploaded something and your users are still getting some old data, and you've added new data, for example, you might have added a new video and they're still getting the old video, you can go in and clear those cached objects, but you are going to be charged. It's called invalidating the cache. So that is it for this lecture. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture, where we're going to create our very first CloudFront distribution. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to go ahead and create our first CloudFront distribution. So this is a lab, and you will need to log into the AWS console. Okay, so here I am in the AWS Management Console. First thing I'm going to do is just go over to S3. And if you remember from the very start of this section of the course, we created this bucket, and this had a picture of me and Faye, and then my brother and me with Jeff Barr. So those are our two images in there. We're going to use this bucket as our origin. So this is what we're going to attach our CloudFront distribution to. So to go and get CloudFront, it's not actually under storage. It's part of networking. So if we just scroll down, you'll see it in here, networking and content delivery, and you'll see CloudFront in there. So go ahead and click on CloudFront, and that will open up our CloudFront distribution. Now you can see straight away that this is a global service. So CloudFront is across the entire world. It's not done on a regional basis. And what we want to do is go ahead and create our first distribution. We have two different types of distribution. We've got a web distribution and an RTMP distribution. I'm going to go and do a web distribution. RTMP is used for media files using Adobe's Flash Media Server's RTMP protocol. That used to be an exam question, doesn't seem to come up as much anymore, but just remember the two different types of distributions. Let's go ahead and do a web distribution. In here we've got our origin domain name, and if you click in here you'll be able to see all our valid origins. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this one, so it was A Cloud Guru 2019. Our origin path, if you don't know what it is, you can click in there, but essentially if you have a directory inside your origin, so a specific directory inside your bucket, you can specify the path. I'm not going to go do that. Origin ID, I'm going to, it's going to set me up an origin ID. It's basically sort of, permissions to access our S3 bucket. I'm going to leave that as default. You can restrict your bucket access, so you can basically say that users will always access the S3 content using CloudFront URLs and not Amazon S3 URLs. And that can be quite useful when you're using signed URLs to restrict your content. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say no for now. And I'm going to leave basically everything as default. So you can scroll all the way down. Here's where you set your TTLs. You've got your minimum, your maximum, your default. So TTLs is just the time to live for your objects in their edge locations. We can restrict viewer access, so we can say, hey, we only want people to be able to use signed URLs for our CloudFront distribution. So a good example of that is, say you're a media company, maybe you're like Netflix, and you want to make sure that only users who've paid for your content are able to access it. Just remember that going into your exam that you can restrict access using signed URLs or signed cookies. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave, like I said, everything as default. You can actually put web application firewalls in front of your CloudFront distributions. We're going to cover off what WAFs are later on in this course, but if you already know what that is, it's basically a layer 7 firewall, so you can do that to increase the security of it. Again, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to basically leave everything as default and click Create Distribution. That is going to go and create and deploy my distribution. Now, this can take some time. It can take up to 15-20 minutes, sometimes up to an hour. It's also similar when you go and disable it. It takes time, and you need to disable it before you delete it. So I'm just going to pause the video, make myself some lunch, and come back when this is ready. Okay, so it's been over an hour and my distribution has now been deployed. So you can see the status down here is deployed. And we've got the ID and we've got the domain name. Now this is the domain name that we would use to connect to our CloudFront distribution. So what I want you to do is just copy that into your clipboard. Just going to hit copy. And then we're going to go over to services, and we're going to go over to S3, and we'll be able to go into our S3 bucket. So mine one was called this. And I'm going to type the distribution's name / and then fayryan-replay.jpg into my browser. So I'm going to paste it in here, then /, so it was Ryan-replay.jpg. I'm going to hit enter, and there we go. It has loaded it and loaded it very, very fast. So we now know that the distribution is working and it's loading our assets from S3. Just going to go back over to the AWS console. If we go back over to CloudFront, again, it's always under networking. So here it is, CloudFront. I'm going to go back in and have a look at my distribution. Now, what you can do is you can click in here and you can go to your distribution settings and you can start editing your settings. So you can change your distribution after it's been deployed. And what I want you to really notice is this invalidation. So we can go ahead and create an invalidation, and we can invalidate individual objects or entire directories or entire subdirectories, etc., etc. So if you did something like / that would invalidate basically everything. So you can invalidate a distribution, and when you're invalidating it, just means that it's no longer going to be on the edge locations. So if you get a scenario question in your exam where you're talking about, you push out some data and then you figure out something's wrong and you do an update, but it's not, showing up correctly, the way to, deal with that is to create an invalidation. So let's go ahead and delete this distribution because it's not covered in free tier. So I'm just going to go in and hit disable and hit disable. And that does actually also take some time. It can take up to 15 minutes. Once it's been disabled, then you can click in here and hit delete. So do that. Don't leave the distribution. We're not going to need it for the rest of this course. So what are my exam tips? So really, you just need to understand what CloudFront is at a high level. You need to understand what edge locations are. So it's a location where content's going to be cached, and it's very separate to an AWS region or availability zone. We have edge locations all over the world. You need to understand what an origin is, and this is basically just the source of the files that your CloudFront distribution will distribute. And this can either be an S3 bucket, can be an EC2 instance, can be an Elastic Load Balancer or Route 53, etc., etc. Then we have our distributions. So this is just the name given to the CDN, which is a collection of edge locations. And our distributions can either be a web distribution, which is the one that we just set up, or an RTMP distribution, which is used for Adobe Flash media streaming. And then moving on, edge locations are not just read-only. So we saw that when we were looking at transfer acceleration. You can write to them too, so you can put an object on them. And objects are cached for the life of the TTL. So they're cached for the life of the time to live, and that's always in seconds. And like we just saw, you can invalidate cached objects, but you are going to be charged. So that is it for this lecture, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. This lecture is a theoretical lecture and it's on Snowball. So you might be thinking, what is Snowball? Well, this is a snowball. This is what they look like. They're basically big disks. So a Snowball is a petabyte scale data transport solution that uses secure appliances to transfer large amounts of data into and out of AWS. So like I said, it's a big disk. It's a way of getting a huge amount of data into AWS, and you can also use it to export data from AWS. And using Snowball addresses common challenges with large-scale data transfers, including high network costs, long transfer times, and security concerns. Transferring data with Snowball is simple, fast, secure, and can be as little as 1/5 the cost of using high-speed internet. And Snowball basically comes in two flavors. You've got 50 terabytes or 80 terabytes. So Snowball uses multiple layers of security designed to protect your data, including tamper-resistant enclosures, 256-bit encryption, and an industry-standard Trusted Platform Module, or TPM, which is designed to ensure both security and full chain of custody of your data. And once your data transfer job has been processed and verified, AWS performs a software erasure of the Snowball appliance. And they do it in such a way that you can't just take a Snowball and restore the data from previous customers as well. It's completely wiped. So it's basically, they nuke it essentially. We also have a Snowball Edge. So Snowball Edge comes in 100 terabytes worth of data. And this is a device with an onboard storage and compute capabilities. So you can actually run like Lambda functions from Snowball Edge. And we're going to cover off what Lambda is later, but essentially this gives you compute and storage. And you can use Snowball Edge to move large amounts of data in and out of AWS as a temporary storage tier for large local data sets, or also to support local workloads in remote or offline locations. And to give you an idea, one of the major airlines, they do a lot of testing of the aircraft, and they actually have Snowball Edges in their aircraft. And this not just storing data inside the aircraft, but it's also doing compute. It's running like Lambda functions as well. So it's basically a Snowball Edge is kind of like having a mini AWS in your, at your disposal. So Snowball Edge connects to your existing applications and infrastructure using standard storage interfaces, streamlining the data transfer process and minimizing setup and integration. And Snowball Edge can cluster together to form local storage tiers and process your data on-premise, helping ensure your applications continue to run even when they are not able to access the cloud. So like I said, it's like having a sort of a portable version of AWS. So what is Snowmobile? Well, Snowmobile is just insane. It's an exabyte scale data transfer service used to move extremely large amounts of data to AWS. And you can transfer up to 100 petabytes per Snowmobile. And it's basically a 45-foot long ruggedized shipping container, which is being pulled by a semi-trailer truck. And it makes it easier to move massive volumes of data to the cloud, including video libraries, image repositories, or even a complete data center migration. And transferring data with Snowmobile is secure, fast, and cost-effective. So this is when you should use a Snowball. So basically, we're looking at different available internet connections here. So we've got a T3, which is 44.736 megabits per second. We've got 100 megabits per second, and then we've got 1,000 megabits per second. And if we were pushing 100 terabytes at those different speeds, you can see how long it's going to take. So it's going to take 269 days or 120 days or 12 days. So if you were basically going to use AWS Snowball with those three different speeds, over here is the different amounts that you should consider using Snowball. So 2 terabytes or more for this connection, 5 terabytes or more for 100 megabits per second, and then 60 terabytes or more for 1,000 megabits per second. So that's all Snowball is. What are my exam tips? Well, just remember what Snowball is. Remember that Snowball can import to S3 and export from S3 as well. And that's really it. You really just need to, if you get a scenario-based question talking about moving large amounts of data into the AWS cloud, you want to use Snowball. So the next lecture is just a fun lecture. It's completely optional. It's where we actually get a Snowball and we connect it up, and then we basically copy some files to our Snowball and then send it off to AWS. That will not come up in your exam at all. So if you want to skip the next lecture, fine. But if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. After that, we're going to cover off Storage Gateway, and then we're going to summarize the rest of this section of the course. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. Like I said in the last lecture, this is an entirely optional lecture. This is a lab on Snowball. If you have your exam tomorrow and you're trying to cram, feel free to skip it. Likewise, if you don't really care about watching a Snowball in real life, feel free to skip this lecture and go on to the next one. So let's go over to the AWS console. Okay, so here I am in the AWS console. Now we'll find Snowball under here. It's under Migration and Transfer. And if you go ahead and click on Snowball,
now I've got a couple of jobs here. The job that actually worked was called Please Send Me a Snowball. And we can see that I created the job, the appliance has been prepared, a shipment has been prepared, it's been shipped to you, and now it's been delivered. So it is actually here at this stage, so it's in my office. And by the time I send it back, we're going to put it in transit to AWS. It will be at AWS, they'll be importing, and then it will be completed. Now, it's going to seem a little bit funny, but, you know, I'm basically just going to put a text file on this Snowball which says, "Hello, Cloud Gurus," and send that back to Amazon. So I don't know if they're actually going to see the data or not, but, you know, the data is only going to be in kilobytes in size, and it is a petabyte, petabyte size appliance, so they might just think I'm crazy. This was the other one that I had earlier on. This was for the Edge. And that was the one that they couldn't send me just because demand has outstripped supply, so that has been cancelled. Now you can go up here and create a job and go through all these different steps. So plan your job. We're going to import into Amazon S3. We can go ahead and keep hitting next over here. I'm not going to go through all this because you can do it yourself if you want, but you're just filling in things like your address details. You need to set up an S3 bucket for it. You need to set your encryptions, and then you're basically setting notifications, which is using SNS, which we'll cover later on in the course, but essentially it sends you automatic emails telling you that your Snowball is en route, and then you just review everything and hit complete. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go back to the Snowball's landing screen, and I'm going to go here and I'm going to get the client. So I'll need the client in order to connect to my Snowball. So I am using Mac OS X currently, so I'm just going to go ahead and download that. And once it's downloaded, I'm going to go ahead and install it on my Mac. And then what we'll do is we'll look at the Snowball, see what it looks like, and how we can plug it in.
Okay, so here we are. We've got our Snowball. It has finally arrived. Like I said, this is not a Snowball Edge. It's just a standard Snowball. It is very big. It's very heavy as well, actually. I was surprised how heavy it is. I got quite out of breath just taking it upstairs. So let's have a look at what each individual component does. Okay, so this is the front of the Snowball, and you can see we've got this little thing just down here. It's like a little handle that we've got to open up. It says open this panel first. Flip it to lie on top of the case. And you can see my Snowball has been damaged by somebody else. AWS, if you're watching this, that's how it arrived. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and open this panel and flip it back up onto the top of the case. And so all we do is we push in this little button here, push this up, and that opens up the top of the case. And then you can see in here, this is our Kindle that we're going to use in order to access our Snowball. Next thing we need to do is just turn it around. We've got to open up this panel on the back. We just click in this button, push it up, and in here we can see at the very top you've got the power cables and the Ethernet cables, etc. And so here's our power cables and our Ethernet cables. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to unwind all of this. I'm going to plug in the power, and then I'm going to plug the Ethernet cable into my router or router, whatever, however you wanted to pronounce it, whether you're Australian or American, downstairs. And then what I'm going to do is fire up the Snowball client. One thing to note is that the Snowball doesn't come with its own power lead. You do need your own adapter. It's just a standard kettle plug though, so we're just going to plug that in now. Okay, so everything's plugged in. And all we need to do now is go down here, and down just above the Kindle you can see there's a power button. So I'm just going to turn that on. And boom! It's quite noisy. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go back over to my PC, and I'm going to go ahead and install the command line tools, and I'll show you how to do that.
Okay, and it actually took a little bit of time for my Snowball to be ready, but once it is ready, you'll see this ready screen, and you can see I'm using RJ45 or standard Ethernet in order to connect in, but you can also use SFP, and you can use copper or optical fiber as well. Okay, so now we've installed the Snowball command line tools, but in order to use it, we actually need to get our credentials. So we need to go into our Snowball dashboard, then we just need to click in here and hit Get Credentials. And then you'll need these credentials to authenticate your access to the appliance. So this is my unlock code, and then this is my manifest file. So I'm going to download my manifest file, and then I'm going to copy and paste my unlock code into my clipboard, and I'm going to move that manifold file over to the same directory as my command line. Okay, so we need to start the Snowball service now. So I'm going to just type in / and then Snowball, and then what I need to do is do then it's start, and then what we need to do is the location, network location. So it's 192.168.1.116. We then need to link the manifest file. So we need to go -m, and then we need to type in the manifest file, which I think is that one. There we go. And then what I need to do is then enter in my unlock code. And this is the unlock code for my manifest, so it's -u. And I just went back over to my browser and got it from the Snowball splash screen. And that should be it. Go ahead and hit enter. And that should start up my Snowball. There you go. So it says ready to transfer. When you're finished, run Snowball stop. So we're all ready to transfer over our appliance. So in order to do that, I'm just going to create a new file. So it's just going to be echo hello cloud gurus. I'm going to output that to a hello.txt file. So if we type in ls, we can see my hello.txt. If I nano hello.txt, you can just have a look and make sure it's in there. So there you go. I can't believe we're actually going to send this to Amazon on a Snowball. So I'm going to clear the screen. Okay, so now it's really, really easy to use. All I need to do is type in Snowball. Actually, I'll just do it like this. So Snowball, and then copy. And then we need our file name, so it's hello.txt. And then we need the directory, or the bucket namespace that we created for this Snowball job. Now, if you do forget it, you can come over here to your browser, go view job details, click on details, and in here you can see resources bucket. And so mine's called A Cloud Guru Snowball. So I'm just going to copy that into my clipboard, paste it in here, and then go ahead and hit enter. And there we go. It has now transferred my file over to my Snowball, and it is all ready to be sent back to Amazon. So we've created an 8-byte file. We've transferred it over to our Snowball, and now I'm going to arrange for Amazon to come and pick the Snowball up. We're going to send it back to AWS, and they're going to then transfer that text file over to my S3 bucket. So I really hope you have enjoyed this lecture, guys. Again, it's just good to know what a Snowball is at a high level and how it all works.
if you ever do, go out and get one, they are lots of fun, but don't do what I did and just copy one single text file and then put it into S3. I might actually do a local backup of our aCloud Guru directory, of our aCloud Guru file server, and put that into S3, so I might not just send them back a text file, but we'll see. Okay, so if you've got any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.
Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to the very last theoretical lecture of this section of the course. So this is on Storage Gateway. Now, I'll be honest, I did the exam about 2 days ago, and Storage Gateway didn't come up. However, it used to be a very popular exam topic, and you should still know what it is because a lot of people do use Storage Gateway to move data into AWS. So what is Storage Gateway? Well, it comes in a bunch of different flavors, but basically it's a service that connects an on-premise software appliance with cloud-based storage to provide seamless and secure integration between an organization's on-premise IT environment and AWS's storage infrastructure. And the service enables you to securely store data to the AWS cloud for scalable and cost-effective storage. So what does that actually mean? Well, let's have a look at our data center. So we've got Storage Gateway here, and Storage Gateway is basically a virtual or physical device, and it's going to replicate your data into AWS. Now, it always used to be a virtual device, but they have released hardware appliances now, so you can actually have a physical Storage Gateway as well. So Storage Gateway's software appliance is available for you to download as a virtual machine image that you install on a host in your data center. And Storage Gateway supports either VMware's ESXi or Microsoft's Hyper-V as the hypervisor. So that's a hypervisor is just what you run virtual machines on. And once you've installed your gateway and associate it with your AWS account through the activation process, you can use the AWS Management Console to create the Storage Gateway option that is right for you. So Storage Gateway comes in effectively 3 different flavors, and they are as follows. So we have our File Gateway, and this is either NFS or SMB. We then have our Volume Gateway, and this is using iSCSI. So File Gateway is basically a way of storing files in S3, whereas Volume Gateway is a way of storing basically copies of your hard disk drives or virtual hard disk drives in S3. And there's 2 different types of Volume Gateway. You've got your stored volumes, and then you've also got your cached volumes as well. And then finally we have Tape Gateway, and this is a virtual tape library. So let's go ahead and have a look at all of them. So we'll start with File Gateway. This is basically where files are stored as objects in your S3 buckets, and they're accessed through a network file system or NFS mount point. And then ownership, permissions, and timestamps are durably stored in the S3 in the user metadata of the object associated with the file. And once objects are transferred to S3, they can be managed as native S3 objects, and bucket policies such as versioning, lifecycle management, and cross-region replication can apply directly to objects stored in your bucket. So you can have all the goodness of S3. So it's basically a way of connecting your on-premise infrastructure to S3. So here's a good example. Got our application server here. It's using an NFS mount point to Storage Gateway that then connects in over the internet or over Direct Connect, which we're going to cover off later on in the networking section of the course, as well as Amazon VPC. And then it's going to store your files in S3. And this diagram slightly out of date. It has S3 IA, doesn't have S3 with intelligent tiering, and it doesn't have the 2 different types of Glacier, but you get the point. It basically is a way of storing your application server's data into S3. So that's all File Gateway is. Volume Gateway is basically presents your applications with the iSCSI block protocol. So basically you can use virtual hard disk drives, and data written to these volumes can then be asynchronously backed up as point-in-time snapshots of your volumes and stored in the cloud as EBS snapshots. And the snapshots are incremental backups that capture only changed blocks, and all the snapshot storage is also compressed to minimize your storage charges. So Volume Gateway basically is a way of storing your virtual hard disk drives in S3, and it looks like EBS snapshots. Now, don't worry, we haven't covered off what EBS is yet. We will cover that off in EC2 in the very next section of the course. But just think of Volume Gateway as a way of storing virtual hard disk drives in the cloud. And it comes in 2 different flavors. We've got stored volumes
and this allows you to store your primary data locally. So you always have a complete copy of your data locally in your data center, and it's backing that data up to AWS. And stored volumes provide your on-premise applications with low latency access to their entire data set. So with stored volumes, it's really important to remember that it's the entire data set, and it's going to provide durable off-site backups. And you can create storage volumes and mount them on an iSCSI drive from your on-premise application servers, and then data written to your stored volumes is stored on your on-premise storage hardware, and this data is then asynchronously backed up to S3 in the form of EBS snapshots, and at the moment it's between 1 gig to 16 terabytes in size for stored volumes. If that has changed, don't worry about it. You're never going to be tested on, volume sizes in the AWS exam. It's always going to be scenario-based questions. So this is what it looks like here. We've got our users and our client. They're using the application servers. This then uses an iSCSI connection to our host. And this is our host is running our gateway virtual machines. And essentially, we're creating volumes on this host. And then what's happening is the virtual machine is then replicating these volumes up to AWS and storing it as snapshots in S3. Cache volumes is slightly different. So you do have to remember the differences between them. And cache volumes is basically, it doesn't do the entire data set locally. It is only doing the most frequently used data in your storage gateway. So cache volumes minimizes the need to scale your on-premise storage infrastructure while still providing your applications with low latency access to their frequently accessed data. So you can create storage volumes of up to 32 terabytes in size and attach them as iSCSI devices from your on-premise application servers. Now your gateway stores the data that you write to these volumes in S3, just like the last one, and it retains recently read data in your on-premise storage servers gateway's cache and upload buffer storage. So it's between 1 gig and 32 terabytes in size for cache volumes. Again, don't worry, you'll never be tested on that. It's just important to understand that cached volumes is a way of caching the most actively used data, whereas with stored volumes, it's the entire data set. So again, here's a diagram. We've got our users, we've got our application servers. It's connecting in through iSCSI to our host, and our host is running our virtual machine gateway, a gateway VM. This is also accessing SAN, so storage attached networking, and again, that's just like basically a big disk. And then the gateway VM is replicating our information over to S3. So that's how that one works. And then finally, we have Tape Gateway. It offers durable, cost-effective solution to archive your data in the AWS cloud. So it's a way of getting rid of tapes. The virtual tape library interface it provides lets you leverage your existing tape-based backup application infrastructure to store data on virtual tape cartridges that you create on your Tape Gateway. So if you are already using tapes and different applications software that connects into tapes, you can actually replace your entire tape infrastructure and just use Tape Gateway. So it's a really great way of moving your backups to cloud. And so each tape gateway is pre-configured with a media changer and tape drives, which are available on your existing client backup applications as iSCSI devices. And you can add tape cartridges as you need to archive your data. And it's supported by really popular backup software like NetBackup, Backup Exec, Veeam, etc., etc. And this is what it looks like. So over here, we've got Data Center A, Data Center B. We've got our tape drives. This is running as a gateway virtual machine. So this is our storage gateway. And essentially, it's just replicating our virtual tapes to S3. And of course, then you can archive them off to Glacier as well to keep your costs low. So that is it for Storage Gateway. Like I said, I did the exam a couple of days ago, and it did not come up at all. It may well have just been moved over to the SysOps Administrator Associate. It is a critical subject to understand going into your SysOps Administrator Associate. That being said, it is also important to understand it if you do work as a solutions architect, especially if you're working with a company that's moving to AWS and they've got a virtual tape, they've got a tape library. It's good to know that you can actually leverage Storage Gateway to move that over to virtual tapes and replicate it over to the cloud. So what are my exam tips? Well, we've got File Gateway. This is NFS, and it's for flat files, and it's going to be stored directly on S3. We've got Volume volume gateway, which is using iSCSI, and it consists of two different volumes. So we've got stored volumes. Stored volumes is your entire data set to be stored on S3. Then we've got cached volumes, and this is where your entire data set is still stored on S3, but the most frequently accessed data is cached on site. And with stored volumes, the entire data set is stored on site. So that's the difference. Stored volumes is you've got your entire data set on site. Cached volumes is where you've only got your most frequently accessed data cached on site. And then we also have Gateway Virtual Tape Library. And I have been, like I said as well, we were talking about that these were virtual appliances or virtual machines. You can also get physical storage gateway appliances as well now. So that is it for this lecture, guys. You've done really, really well. You're at the end of the S3 and IAM section of the course. In the next lecture, we're just going to summarize everything that we've learned. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to the very last lecture in the S3 and IAM section of the course. So congratulations, you've completed your first theoretical and practical section of the course. So we're going to look at everything we learnt in this section. So we learnt that identity access management consists of the following. So it consists of users, groups, roles, and then you apply policies to these three different things. So you apply a policy to your users, groups, and roles. If you apply a policy to your group and you've got users within that group, they're going to inherit that policy automatically. Now, I know we didn't really cover off roles much in this section of the course. We are going to look at it in more detail in the next section of the course. We did create a role when we turned on cross-region replication. So if you actually go into IAM and have a look at your roles, you'll see a role there for cross-region replication. We also learnt about JSON. So this is what policies look like. So it's JavaScript object notation language. Now, IAM itself does not come up much in the Certified Solutions Architect Associate exam anymore. It's all been moved to the security specialty. That being said, you can't actually use AWS without knowing IAM, so it is really important to understand the core concepts of IAM and what users, groups, roles, and policies are. We also learned that IAM is universal. It does not apply to regions at this time. The root account is simply the account that's created when you first set up your AWS account, and it has complete administrator access. New users have no permissions when first created, and you'll find this is a theme within Amazon. It's called least privilege. So whenever you create a new user, that user is not going to have any rights or any privileges until you grant them privileges. Likewise, when we look at S3, when we create our bucket, it's locked down. It's not public, and making objects public is not that easy. You have to go through a process to do it. So that's a common theme within Amazon Web Services. New users are assigned an access key ID and secret access key when first created. These are not the same as a password. You cannot use the access key ID and secret access key to log into the console. You use it to access the AWS via the APIs and the command lines, however, and we are going to look at that in the next section of the course. And you only get to view your access key ID and secret access key once. If you lose them, you have to regenerate them, so make sure you save them in a secure location. So moving on, the final bits we learned about IAM is you always set up multi-factor authentication on your root account, and you can also create and customize your own password rotation policies. So moving away from IAM, let's look at S3. So remember that S3 is object-based. It allows you to upload files, and those files can be 0 bytes all the way up to 5 terabytes, and there is unlimited storage, and you store your files in these things called buckets, and it's basically just a folder in the cloud. Now, S3 is a universal namespace, so that means that your bucket names must be unique. You can't have test bucket because somebody already owns it. You can't have a Cloud Guru because somebody already owns it, and it's not me, sadly. And this is what the URL looks like when going to S3. So it's always S3, then the region, and then .amazonaws.com, and then / your bucket name. Now, remember that S3 is object-based storage, so it's not suitable to install an operating system on or a database or anything like that. And when you upload objects to S3 or files to S3, your browser is always going to get a HTTP 200 status code that the upload has been successful. Now, by default, all newly created buckets are private. You set up access control to your bucket using bucket policies, and bucket policies are bucket-wide. And then you can also use access control lists, and these can go down to the individual files or objects in your bucket. And remember that S3 buckets can be configured to create access logs, which logs all requests made to the S3 bucket. And these can be sent to another bucket in the same AWS account, or even another bucket in another AWS account. And we go into that architecture a lot in the security specialty. There's certain ways you can design your AWS infrastructure to be super secure using multiple accounts. Moving on, the key fundamentals of S3. So basically S3, you've got a key, and this is simply the name of the object. You've then got a value, and this is simply the data. It's made up of a sequence of bytes. So sometimes people refer to S3 as a key value pair. We then have the version ID, which we saw when we turned on versioning. We have metadata, so we have data about data that we're storing, and we do that through tags. And then you get some sub-resources such as access control lists and then torrents as well. Now remember the consistency model going into your exam for S3. So it's read after write consistency of puts of new objects and eventual consistency for overwrite puts and deletes. And this can take some time to propagate. And like I said, what does that mean in everyday language? Well, if you put an object into S3, you're going to be able to read it immediately. If you overwrite an object or delete an object in S3 and you read it instantly after that, you could get the old version or you could get the new version. So sometimes you will get eventually the right version, but sometimes it takes some time to propagate. Then, seriously, this is a big exam topic. It's worth at least 4 or 5 marks. You have to understand the different S3 classes of storage. So we've got S3 standard. That's what most people use. S3 infrequently access. So this is where you want the same sort of durability and availability as standard S3. But you want to pay a lower fee, but you still need instant access to S3 infrequently accessed. We then have S3 one zone infrequently accessed. This is what's only going to be in one availability zone, so you have to plan for that. But it is a much lower cost. S3 intelligent tiering uses machine learning to move your objects around depending on how often you use them. S3 Glacier is for data archival, and you can configure your retrieval time from minutes to hours. And then we have S3 Glacier Deep Archive, and this is basically Amazon's lowest cost storage class, but you will have a retrieval time of 12 hours. Moving on, let's talk about encryption. So encryption in transit is achieved by using HTTPS and TLS. So every time you go and visit, let's say, google.com, if you've got a HTTPS in the browser, that means that traffic is going to be encrypted. So if someone is in the middle trying to listen to that, they won't be able to figure out what it is you're viewing on Google. So that's how we do encryption in transit. So in terms of how this relates to S3, whenever you go to aws.amazon.com and you go into the S3 console, so long as you're using HTTPS, all the traffic, all the files that you're uploading are going to be encrypted. So that's encryption in transit. Now, S3 also has encryption at rest, and this is achieved by both the server-side encryption as well as client-side encryption. On the server side, it's achieved by 3 different ways. So we've got S3 managed keys. This is where S3 just handle all our encryption for us, and we don't have to worry about it. We've got AWS Key Management Service, or KMS. This is where we can start using keys from the KMS service, and we cover this in an awful lot of detail in the Certified Security Specialty. And then we've got server-side encryption with customer-provided keys. So this is where you provide your keys and you manage the encryption and the actual maintenance of those keys. And then we also have client-side encryption. So this is where you encrypt the objects and then you upload them to S3. So that is encryption with S3 on AWS. Moving on to cross-region replication, basically you just need to understand what it is. It is definitely worth 1 or 2 marks in the exam. Versioning must be enabled on both the source and destination buckets. Regions must be unique. You can't do cross-region replication to the same region because then it's not cross-region. And then we have files in an existing bucket are not going to be replicated automatically when you turn cross-region replication on. All subsequent updated files will be replicated automatically. Delete markers are not replicated, and deleting individual versions or delete markers will not be replicated. So basically, going into your exam, it's really important to understand what cross-region replication is at a high level. and that's it really. Moving on to lifecycle policies. So what is a lifecycle policy? Well, basically, it automates moving your objects between the different storage tiers. That's all the policies are. And they can be used in conjunction with versioning, and they can be applied to current versions as well as previous versions. Moving on to S3 transfer acceleration. So we have our users, they're all around the world. We have our edge locations. Our users will upload their files to the edge locations first, and then those files will go over the AWS backbone network to S3. And we saw how mostly it can improve speed and performance. So if you do need to increase the performance of your, of your users being able to upload files to S3, look at S3 transfer acceleration. Moving on to CloudFront. So we learned what an edge location was. So this is the location where the content is going to be cached, and it's separate to an AWS region or availability zone. We learned what an origin was. This is the origin of all our files that the CDN will distribute, and this can either be an S3 bucket, an EC2 instance, an Elastic Load Balancer, or Route 53. And then we learned what a distribution was, and this is simply the name given to the CDN, which consists of a collection of edge locations. And then we have two different types of distributions. We've got our web distributions. This is typically used for websites. And then we've got RTMP. This is used for Adobe Media, and it's used for media streaming. Also, with CloudFront, we learnt that edge locations are not read-only. You can write to them as well, i.e. put an object to them. So we looked at that with transfer acceleration. And then objects are cached for the time to live, or TTL, and that value is always in seconds. And then you can clear cached objects by invalidating them, but you will be charged. So do remember that. Snowball, seriously, you just need to understand what Snowball is. So basically, it's a big disk that you can use to move your data in and out of the AWS cloud. And Snowball can be imported into S3, so you can import data into S3. You can also use Snowball to move large amounts of data out of S3. Moving on to Storage Gateway. Now, I did this exam just a couple of days ago, and Storage Gateway wasn't there. That being said, it does come up actually in the Solutions Architect Professional exam. So it is just important to understand Storage Gateway, and it may well still come up in the Associates. It always used to. It did for 3 years, so I don't want to risk not teaching it. So we have the different types of Storage Gateway. We've got File Gateway. This is used for flat files that are stored directly on S3, and that's NFS. We then have Volume Gateway. That's iSCSI, and we have two different types of Volume Gateways. We've got our stored volumes, and this means that your entire data set is stored on site. So it's literally a 100% copy of your data being stored on site, and then it's backed up to S3. Then also have cached volumes, and this is where the entire data set is stored on S3, and only the most frequently accessed data is cached on site. And if you get those two confused, just look for the word cache. That's all you need to see, or cache, however you want to pronounce it, whether you're Australian or American. We also then have Gateway Virtual Tape Library, and this is used for backups, and it works with really popular backup applications like Net Backup, Backup Exec, Veeam, etc. And it's a great way of getting rid of your physical tapes. And then finally, I would read the S3 FAQ before going into your exam, because S3 is going to come up an awful lot in the Solutions Architect Associate exam. So that is it for this section of the course, guys. You've done really, really well. We're going to go and look at EC2, which is Amazon's virtual machine service in the next section. We're going to learn an awful lot. We're going to start using the command line. We're going to start provisioning web servers, and it is an awful lot of fun. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next section of the course. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're all